Man, I'm so honored to be here. As I said, my name is Pastor Steve. If you had never met me before, I got into the ministry at 19 years old. And from the very beginning, I was doing family ministry. I jumped right in the Army. So since I was 19, which just a few years ago, yeah, you guys laughed way too quick at that. But from the beginning, I've gotten to minister to military families, families walking through addiction and recovery, blended families, single parents, you name it. I've had the ability to minister to every type of parent that I could imagine. I hold a master's degree in family counseling, where I've gotten to actually study under Dr. James Dobson. If you've ever heard of him, he's literally written the Christian book on parenting, and he was one of the people who literally I studied under for my master's degree. And I say all of that not to impress you, although if you're impressed, hey, so I'm joking. I say that not to impress you, but to say I have literally spent my entire adult life dedicated to one mission, and that's to build stronger families, okay? My goal is to have every kid have the chance to grow into a healthy adult who loves their lives and knows that there is a God who loves them. So if during this message at all, I am prefacing it because I get into some heavy hitting stuff in here. If at all you feel like I've stepped on your toes a little bit, I want you to know it's nothing personal, not from judgment. As I said when I prefaced, I'm a parent still trying to figure this stuff out. But I want you to know that this sermon was written from a place of love and a deep investment, because I believe your kids are worth it, and I believe that you're worth it as parents. So whether you're parenting toddlers, you're talking to your grown kids, I want you to realize that you are the most consistent teacher that your child will ever have. The question is, what are you being consistent in teaching them? You know, we often think legacy, and that's kind of the title of this sermon. If it wasn't in the bulletin, you wanted to write it down. I'm calling it the Legacy Manuscript, because my goal is at the end of this that you could start forming your life into something positive that your kids share in stories that they tell when they have children as well. So we often think of legacy as these big things, college funds or family heirlooms that you get to pass down, maybe the estate if you're really well off. But often legacy is mostly defined in moments, especially small ones, unnoticed ones that you might even think that you're passing down to your kids, you're truly passing down to them. And this summer has been an amazing summer in the family ministries as a whole. I know Pastor Richie was up here just last week with an absolutely amazing message from your teens. And he's gotten to go on a missions trip. He's taken them to camp. In the kids ministry, we've gone to camp. We've had VBS. We have a moving up ceremony, promotion from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade in just a matter of weeks. So really huge summer for the family ministries. And to kick it all off, my wife and I, we got to go out of town and study under some of the best psychologists for children's psychologists there are, children's pastors, authors. And while we're out of town, we're sitting there, I'm sitting down with this guy named John, and he starts telling me this story. And he said he goes out to dinner, a double date, him and his wife, and there for the scope of this story, I want you to realize that they're late 40s, early 50s, so their kids are kind of grown out of the house. And as they sit down, he said he sits down with his best friend and they start talking. And however the conversation went, the story of his friend's 8th birthday comes up. 8th, and now I want you to realize, as I said, they're late 40s, early 50s. This is a story that's 40 plus years old. And as he starts telling the story, John said his best friend's wife kind of starts shifting around in her seat, a little uncomfortable, like she's heard this story so many times. And John, being the best friend that he is, he sees that his friend's wife is uncomfortable, so he's like, this is going to be a good story. Like, she already doesn't want him to tell this story. I'm intrigued, so he sits down, and the story goes that when it was his 8th birthday, 40 years before this story happens, 8th birthday. He said it was coming, and he felt like no one even knew his birthday was coming. He was turning 8 years old. He said his parents were going through a really, really messy divorce, and it seemed every time they would sit down, their parents were giving them worse news about what was going on and where they were going to live, and they were having to meet with social workers and divorce attorneys, and his 8th birthday is coming up, and if you have a children, or if you remember when you were a child, birthdays are a big deal. To my mom, she still talks, she's got an entire birthday month, okay? It doesn't hit the month of October. Write that down, everybody. My mom's birthday is in October, but it doesn't get to October without knowing that her birthday's coming. And he said no one was even acknowledging that he was about to turn 8 years old. And he said it became the week of his birthday. And he said he's trying to drop hints like, oh man, turning the big 8, it's gonna be crazy. All I want is these little action figure toys. But no one was really listening. And now it's the week of, and still no one, if you see a kid and you walk up and say, hey man, your birthday's coming up, are you excited? No one was even doing that. He felt like he didn't exist. And finally his older sister realizes this, and she's like, man, I've got to throw him a party. So she starts calling his friends and his family, and she even goes and buys a cake for him with her own money, because whatever was going on with the parents, they were so caught up with their attorneys that they didn't even realize. And now the big birthday party comes, and the friend, he's telling this part of the story with a certain amount of excitement. He said his friends were over, his family was over, and as he's opening presents one after another, he got like some socks or some weird things like that, and at the end he didn't get the action figures he wanted. But he's like, he realizes that his sister did a really awesome thing, and his sister comes up to him and she's like, man, how was the party? And he's like, oh, thank you so much, it was so great. Man, I had so much fun. I forgot about life for a minute. And she goes, yeah, but something's still bothering you. What is it? And he said, well, I mean, the party was great, but I didn't get the toy that I wanted. I didn't get the action figure that I wanted. And at the sound of that, his sister flips out. She just starts going, you're so ungrateful. I put together this whole party for you, and you're not even thankful. You're just so selfish and ungrateful, and who cares about a dumb toy when we had the whole family here? And at the sound of that, he said he jumps up, he runs to his room, and he cries the rest of the night, alone, thinking that he didn't matter, that everyone was mad at him, that he couldn't do anything right. And John said, man, yeah, it was awkward. And I get why his wife was shifting in his seats. And he goes, well, man, like, what did you get for your birthday that year? I don't know, trying to make it less awkward now that they're at dinner. And he's looking at his 50-year-old friend about to cry from an 8-year-old story. And he goes, man, John, I have no idea. I don't know what I got. And he goes, oh, well, like, who came? Who came to the party? He's like, John, I don't know. Man, that was 40 years ago. You expect me to remember that? And he goes, yeah, I expect you to remember that. You're telling a story about 40 years ago, and the one thing that you remember is your sister freaking out at you. This is a 40-year-old story, but you know what he remembered? He didn't remember the toys. He didn't remember the stuff. He remembered feeling invisible. He remembered feeling unheard. He remembers parents who seem to care more about their divorce attorneys than him. He remembers a sister crashing out and raging on him. The real you is not the you that you present out in public. The real you is the you that you are behind closed doors. The real you is the music choice that you put on in your car. The real you is the TV shows or the movies that you allow to come into your house. And I promise you, whatever you're putting in, the real you will eventually be the you that comes out in stressful situations. And that's often the version of you that your kids actually learn from. The tone that you take with your spouse, the way that you treat yourself when you fail? Do you say, man, I'm so dumb, I can't do anything right? What do you think your kid's gonna hear? What do you think your kid is gonna say about themselves when they think that it's okay to talk to yourself that way? If you truly wanna know what type of parent you are, you need to look at who you are in private. And that's point number one. Point number one is write in the margins. You know, as I said, I want this to be a certain type of manifesto, a little book for you to be able to take home. So point number one is, write in the margins. Who you want to be is the you that you need to start parenting. If you want to start parenting with a purpose, you need to start being intentional with what you write in your own margins, in your own books. In other words, you need to start being intentional with yourself. Start being honest with yourself. Because what you practice in private gets passed down in public. Let me say that one more time. What you practice in private when you think no one else is looking is what's getting passed down to your kids that they're going to do in public. The words that you use are going to be the words that they say. So if you start hearing your kids say things that you don't appreciate, or your kids start acting in a way that you feel is selfish, where do you think they're learning it from? Matthew 6:6. Matthew 6:6 says, when you pray, and I hope that you guys do pray, not just here, okay, because your kids need to see you pray. They need to hear you pray. And God's assuming that you pray, okay? He's not saying if you pray, he says, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray with your Father who is unseen. Matthew reminds us that our private devotion is seen and rewarded by God. And it's also where our kids first encounter their real faith. We're going to enforce it here. We're going to teach them lessons that are applicable here. But at home is where your kids encounter that real faith. Your prayers, humility, and the character when no one's watching you will shape how your children approach God. Private faith builds a public legacy because everyday moments are the curriculum that your children use for their faith. I recently saw a pastor on Facebook, and maybe you guys did, but he said, if you're going to come to church, only one service or 1 hour, I think he said, per week, then you need to bring your kids into your service with you. His justification was that your kids need to see you worship. And while I appreciate the idea behind that, I truly do, I respectfully disagree. Your kids need to be in kids' church. That's where my kid is. That's where your kids need to be. Your teenagers need to be in the student ministry. They don't need to be playing baseball on a Sunday morning. They don't need to be going to play practice on a Sunday morning. They need to be hearing God's word with an applicable message for their age group. You need to be here, okay? This sermon is for you. The curriculum back there with this amazing kids team, and half the team is back there that they're going to be teaching today, that's for them. This is for you. Now, I agree that your kids need to see you worship, okay? I do agree with that. They need to hear you talking about the goodness of God. Are you doing that? They need to see you using your hands, the hands that God gave you, outstretched, reaching God's feet. Whether that's feeding the homeless, whether, I don't know, doing some sort of charity. Your kids need to see you doing that. You need to normalize talking about God. You need to normalize how good God is. You need to normalize loving people. You need to be the physical manifestation of God's love. And we see that in Deuteronomy 6:6. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Not just on your tongue here, but on your hearts at home. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. It doesn't say to only teach your kids during devotion. It doesn't say teach your kids only Sunday morning when you sit them in here where they should really be back there. It doesn't say to only play Christian music on your way to church so that way you can sound good when you pull into the parking lot. It doesn't say to be a model Christian inside of these doors because we don't care. And it doesn't say, then you leave here and go complain about your server because the service is too slow, because that's what your kids are going to learn. It says do it while walking, while lying down, while getting up. In the everyday flow of your life, faith is formed in the margins, in the tone at dinner, the patience during conflict. And you better believe faith is formed in the grace after their mistakes. Your quiet times teach your kids, but it's really going to teach your kids one of two things. Are you teaching them love, faith, growth, or are you quietly teaching them how to neglect God? You can't fake it at home, okay? You might be able to come here and put on a good face. You might be able to go to work and talk about how good the sermon was last week, and it was awesome. Pastor Richie, thank you. But eventually, your kids are going to see through your performance. But if what they see in private is grace, humility, and truth, you're building up a legacy that preaches louder than the words that you're lying to out in public. So that's point number one, guys. In the margins, in the private, in your house, you need to start taking care of your heart first. You need to start setting yourself up to be the person that your kids actually see, to be the person that you want them to be. And if you're not the person you want your kids to be, then they're never going to be that person. And then point number two is you need to publish what you preach, how to live it publicly, because public pressure reveals the private convictions. Eventually, you're going to be pressed out in public, okay? Eventually, if you venture into the real world long enough, you're going to get pressure, okay? You're going to get stress. Can I get an amen? And it's easy to talk the talk at church, but your kids see what you really believe when your life is frustrating. In traffic, at the checkout line. I mean, I've seen videos of you guys as parents on the sidelines, okay? Okay? You know, Matthew 5:16 says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see the good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew calls us to live a way that reflects God's character, especially when it's hard. You know, the world sees your deeds. The world sees what you want them to see, in other words. Whatever type of facade that you're building up, you can show that to the world. But your kids are going to see your default. Your kids are going to see, after you put on your pajamas and you're sitting in front of the TV, your kids are going to hear the way that you've talked about your day. Do you gripe? Do you complain? Or are you thankful that God gave you a job? You know, being consistent is more powerful than being a perfect parent. Being consistent is more important than putting on perfection when we go out into the world. You know, facades mean nothing if the ones that God has entrusted us with are getting the trash. Kids don't need a flawless parent. They need a faithful one. Your child watches how you handle life under pressure, and that's where they learn how to treat their friends. So think about that. Modeling doesn't stop at home. It's how you live in public that really matters. Your work ethic. Do you complain about your job every single day when God gave you one? Do you complain about your boss every single day even though God has placed them over you? It's how you handle traffic. Are you swerving in and out? Are you breaking every traffic law because you're late and you didn't plan good enough? Guys, it's how you treat the waitress. It's how you treat the stranger. It's how you treat the homeless person on the corner. All of that is shaping your kid without you ever saying a word, but they're watching. They're learning. When who you are on Sunday matches who you are on Tuesday, that's when your light shines the clearest. A Life of Integrity is the most compelling sermon, the most compelling book, the most compelling lesson that you could ever teach your kids, because they won't always remember what you said. They won't always remember who's at the party. They won't always remember what food that they just ate, but they'll never forget how you lived, or more importantly, how you made them feel. But the good news is, I've beat you up a little bit, but the good news is I have a third point to the sermon. And that's start a new chapter. It's never too late. I was telling you about that story earlier, and that's not actually where John ended that story. He said when he left dinner that night and he went home, he couldn't stop thinking about his friend. And he couldn't stop thinking about how 40 years later, this one chapter in his life, this one birthday, completely wrecked him the rest of the time. And he gets home, and of course he hops on Google. You can Google anything, and he starts Googling these action figures, right? And sure enough, the very first thing that pops up is all the action figures. And he goes, man, that was super cool that I found these, but obviously they don't make them anymore because, it was 40 years ago. But he found a store on Google, antiques, whatever you want to call it, collectibles, and he found all of these, but they had to come in from overseas, and he said he ordered them that night. And then he completely forgot because it came from some overseas place, and I don't know if he was talking about tariffs or I don't know, but he said it took forever for this little shop on Google that he found to actually ship them, and he completely forgot. And then all of a sudden they came in, and he sees the UPS driver, and he goes home and he opens up the box, and he's like, what are these? And first thing he starts doing is playing with them, because that's what you do with action figures, right? So he starts playing with these toys, and then he remembered that entire story. And he remembered how these little action figures, these little toys just made him feel. And he was like, man, that was so much fun. I could see why a little kid would love these things. And he immediately put them in a gift bag, wraps them up, and then brings them over to his buddy's house for dinner. And him and his wife, they're having a double date at his buddy's house, and he cooks them dinner. And halfway through the dinner, he goes, oh man, we got you something. And he hands the bag, and he's like, man, what'd you get me this for? And he starts unwrapping. And he pulls these little action figures out of the bag, and he said his buddy just starts crying. He starts looking at the little toy, and he looks up at John, and he goes, man, I can't believe you remembered. I can't believe you remembered. I can't believe you thought of me. It wasn't because of the toys. It wasn't because of these little $50 antiques that he bought on Google. It was because of the moment. The entire story changed in that moment. His entire story of this chapter of his life, this narrative shifted. What once was a memory of pain and tears of sadness and tears of anger were instantly redefined by a kindness of his friend. It went from heartbreak to healing, tears of sadness to tears of joy. John said he's heard his buddy tell that story like 50 times, but it's a different story now. It doesn't end at the birthday. It doesn't end at crying alone in his room. Every time that ends now, it ends with a caring friend reached out and made him feel heard. At 50 years old, parents, hear this. The story isn't finished. Maybe you blew it. Maybe you did. We've been there. I've been there. Maybe you weren't the parent that you thought you'd be. Maybe you aren't where you thought you wanted to be in life. But God isn't done writing your story. He could redeem the worst chapters. One act of kindness can completely rewrite the memory. Just like the stories with these toys, a single moment can change the entire narrative. You don't need to fix everything at once. Did John fix his entire childhood? No. But sometimes one meaningful gesture begins the healing process. God can use one small act of grace to redeem an entire chapter. But part of that story is yours. Philippians 1:6 says, "Be confident of this, that he who began good works in you will carry it to completion until the day of Christ Jesus." You are still growing. And your kids don't need the perfect model. They need one willing to grow with them. When they see you apologize, when they see you try again, when they see you make new choices, make better choices, when they see that it's never too late to learn. You don't just model strength, you model surrender. You don't just model arrival, you model the beginning. You don't have to be perfect, you have to be present and willing to change, because your kids are watching. Your kids are hearing. Your kids are in the same household with you. What will they remember 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road when they're telling a story of their birthday? Are they going to remember the food that you served? Are they going to remember the amazing cake that your mom makes? Hey, Mom, thank you. Or are they going to remember the time that you blew it and never redeemed it? The time that you got so mad at them, you punished them instead of disciplined them. The moment that you had too many drinks and you didn't tell them that you were sorry the next day. You didn't speak to them like a normal human being. You didn't admit that your fault. Your part in their story is growth. You're teaching them to grow. And you get to start shaping that right now. Not by being flawless, but by being faithful. Because God's grace is sufficient, even when we're exhausted, even when we're tired, even if our kids are grown and we're just grandparents now. We could still teach our kids how to parent their kids. Even if you're guilt-ridden, God's got grace. And God is sufficient. Let God be the model for you. And how can you start living that? Whether it's at home, when you think nobody's watching. How can you hold God in your heart when you're alone and praying? When you're in your car, are you talking about how awesome your kid's day is with them? Are you talking to your heavenly Father about the goodness things that God has given you? What music are you playing when you're walking around at work? Are you being a light, or are you being more darkness? That is how we can start parenting with a purpose. Start with yourself. Start with your house. Because me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And if you talk to my daughter right now, you know that we're going to be the outstretched hands of God in everything we do in life. And I don't have to tell her that. She gets to watch my wife drive around and just deliver water to homeless people. Because we love people. All people. Because Christ tells me to love people. And I have Christ's love in my heart, and now my daughter gets to see that. But maybe you're sitting there, whether you're at home or whether you're here, and you've never actually asked God to be the one that changes you into your heart. We have that opportunity right now.